hey, it's a Friday, and for once I'm shooting this on a Friday. Got to shoot it and upload it and get it up in time for people to see it when it goes live. But here's the thing. If you watch this channel of mine, either channel of mine, and you hear me talk quite a bit about cars, you often hear me talk about the turbine car, the Chrysler turbine car. And the Chrysler turbine car, of course, has become a thing that's really, really big in my life and my career. I wrote a book about it. I've driven 3 of them and all that kind of thing, right? But you might not know, although many people do know this, but there are some people probably don't realize that the winged cars, Dodge Daytona and the Plymouth Superbird, are also another big thing in my career. And I wanted to talk a little bit about this because it's funny. I was going through some old photographs looking for something else, and I ran across the cover of Mopar Action Magazine, which I'll put up on the screen several times while we're talking because it's one of the coolest photographs I've ever seen. The fact that I got to drive that car is what makes that picture cool. It has nothing to do. I don't tell people, hey, I've been on the cover of a magazine. I go, I got to drive Bobby Isaac's car. And so that right there is a model of Bobby Isaac's car. Bobby Isaac won the national championship in NASCAR in 1970. And he also won a lot of races in 69. He had 2 very good years in a row. And he won the NASCAR championship in 1970. And that was, of course, the car that he ran on the super speedways. So back then, they still ran on dirt. So he'd actually have 3 different cars: a dirt track car, a small track, paved track car, and then the super speedway car, which was the winged car. And so that car that Bobby Isaac drove, later on, they took it to Bonneville Salt Flats. They sent a bunch of speed records in it, and then it was put out to pastures, they say. And the car got dismantled. It became a pile of parts at one point in time. There's a whole story to it. And then, believe it or not, the pile of parts got reassembled and is now a complete, full-running car. And a guy named Tim Wellborn owns it. And Tim Wellborn's got a really, really cool museum in Alabama, which is basically his personal car collection in a really cool building. He's a nice guy, too. And I was doing research on a book about Bobby Isaac, which was one of the first things I ever wrote of any length. And I was calling around trying to get information. I was interviewing people. And somebody said, oh, yeah, Bobby Isaac's car still exists. A guy named Tim Wellborn's got it. And so I tracked him down, got him on the phone, and he said, oh, yeah, I've got the car. I've got it. It's running and everything. He said, you want to come down here? I'll show it to you. And in fact, the car runs. I'll let you drive it. Now, I've been told that twice in my life. Once by Tim Wellborn and once by Jay Leno, who said, if you come to California, I'll let you drive the turbine car. So, how fast can I get to Alabama to drive this car? So I discussed it with Tim. We picked some dates and stuff. And the funny thing is, at that point in time, I'd never written for Mopar Action Magazine, but I contacted Mopar Action, and there's a guy named Cliff, who I later became very good friends with. And he said, Steve, if you want me to, I'll fly down there with you and meet you down there, and then we'll go out there together, and I'll photograph it to make sure you get some good photographs of you driving the car, and you can write an article about it for the magazine. And I said, oh, this is coming together nicely because that'll give me an excuse to go, but it'll also defray the cost of the trip. And so I went down to Alabama, went to where Tim Wellborn kept the car at that time because he did not have his own personal museum yet, and got to spend the day out there and got to drive the car. And so while we were out there, we were doing all kinds of stuff, including photographing the car on the road, and that's where you get some of these photographs here. And it was just a lot of fun. But the cool part was that I got to actually drive that car. So I can actually tell people that this particular car I got to drive. Now, the funny part is I didn't have a GoPro back then because GoPro didn't exist. But I did have a digital camera with me. And so at one point in time, I was sitting on the floor of the passenger side of the car with Tim Wellborn driving. And then we switched places, and I handed him the camera and I go, can you take my picture? So I do have a photograph of myself behind the wheel of the car. I'll try to get that. It's buried someplace, but I'm sure I've got it. I can find it. But I've got photographs of myself driving that car, and it was a blast. And the funny part was that the car is configured as it was back then, except there's a minor difference. Instead of having a 426 Hemi in it, it's got a crate motor that's over 500 cubic inches. My understanding is that when he had the car and he's rebuilding it, at one point in time, Chrysler asked him if you'd bring it someplace. And he said, well, I'm still finishing. I haven't got it finished yet. And I think in an effort to help him get the build finished faster, they said, well, we'll give you a crate motor if that'll help you. And they gave him a crate motor. It's just not a 426, but it's just got the little pipes. And by little, I mean short. They're big, but they're short. And I stood next to that car when he fired it up indoors, and it's loud. It sounds like a World War II aircraft, like a fighter, like a P-51 Mustang or something. It's insanely loud, but it's a cool loud, okay? And so anyways, I go, where are we going to drive the car? And we were near Talladega, the racetrack, because that's where the museum was that he had the car in at that time. And he goes, oh, we're just going to take it on the road, out on the road. I said, really? I said, because, it doesn't take, a lawyer to point this out. No headlights, no turn signals, no brake lights, no nothing to make it street legal. And he seemed to indicate that he knew a lot of people in town. They knew him. They knew that car. And somehow it just never got in trouble with the law. So we're out there zipping back and forth. And this was right around the time of something was happening at that racetrack. I forgot which. I think they have two big races there each year. And it was right around that time. Because I remember zooming down the road in that car, people standing by the roadside waving and stuff. We're waving back. And at one point in time, we stopped to switch drivers, and a guy pulled up behind us. Is that Bobby Isaac's car? And I thought it was really cool. People recognize that it's not just a race car. It is Bobby Isaac's car. So it was a blast. Car's only got one seat, so yeah, the passenger sits on the floor. I had the opportunity later in life, i.e. a few years after that, to ride in Richard Petty's Superbird doing laps at the Atlanta Motor Speedway, which I posted a video about that someplace. I'll see if I can dig that up. And again, sitting on the floor, hanging onto a roll bar, and somebody else is driving. Didn't get to drive that car, but now I can say I've driven that car and ridden in the other car. And so I hate to put this on camera, but I'm going to. And I wrote a book about the winged cars themselves, Dodge Daytona, Plymouth Superbird, design, development, production, and competition. That was published by CarTech Books, and they did a pretty large press run of this book, and it sold out. It sold out. And I called the publisher back and I said, guys, this book is selling so well, we need to put it back into print. And they said, well, the problem is it is a hardcover, large format book with something like 450. Oh, check it out. There it is. K&K Insurance. About 450 high-resolution photographs. It cost a fortune to print, and we had to sell it for $42.95. So I'll tell you what, we can't put it back into print. And I said, oh, that's too bad. So what's funny is some of you, the older school people here, are going to remember this. When it was going out of print, they called me and said, do you want to buy what's left? And I think there's like 40 or 50 books left in stock. I said, I'll take them all. And I came on and I did not a giveaway, but I sold them at a discount. And I said, just to let you know, these are the last books, the books out of print. They're gone after this. And I sold them for a lot less than cover value. And sold them out almost instantly. And spent a weekend signing these books and shipping them out. And then sadly, I had people tell me they pop up on eBay now for like $200 or $300 a piece. Now, I don't know if they sell for that, but I've seen them listed for over $200 before. I have talked to my publisher about possibly getting it back into print, but it's going to take some money, and I may just front the money myself to make it happen. But we'll see. But it was a great project. It was a lot of fun to work on. But of course, any excuse to hang around these cars and work on, writing about these cars and doing research about them is always fun. But in case you don't know this, back in 1967 to 66, Ford and Chrysler were beating each other up on the tracks of NASCAR. General Motors had dropped out. They're like, screw it. We don't even want to get involved in this anymore. And so when Chrysler came up with that race Hemi and got NASCAR to approve it, they thought, okay, this is the silver bullet. This is going to do it for us. And Ford was still beating them. And Chrysler was like pulling their hair out. Like, how can Ford beat us when we've got the Hemi? Because they thought the Hemi should have done it. The problem is that the cars weren't shaped very well aerodynamically. And we know this now, but it didn't seem obvious back then. But if you take a car from 1966 and put a gigantic motor in it and get it going really fast, the wind resistance builds up pretty badly above 150. Between 160 and 180, it gets really bad. And it is an exponential curve. It is not a straight line curve, or a straight line. And so the problem is that you have to start streamlining the cars. And Ford had figured this out and had been just tweaking the body lines in some of their cars, probably illegally, but in NASCAR, if you ain't cheating, you're not doing it right. So they actually contacted some people in aerodynamics at the missile division, where they just laid off a bunch of engineers. And I interviewed a bunch of these guys, including a guy named John Pointer. And I've talked about this before. And he said, oh, yeah, at this point, it's not horsepower, it's aerodynamics. And they, what do you mean? He goes, well, you take the car and you put a nose cone and a wing on it, and those two things right there will solve your problem. And of course, it's absurd. You'll never do it. And the guy goes, well, if you think it'll win races and make that car go fast, we'll do it. And he said, really? And so they said, you're working for us now. He sent him out to Chelsea Proving Grounds and said, come up with a design for the nose cone and the wing. And so the guy spent some time out there experimenting, I'm not making this up, with cardboard, angle iron, and duct tape until he found the shapes he liked. He'd have them made in fiberglass. They'd test them. They'd wind tunnel test them. It was some of the first wind tunnel testing they ever did. In fact, they got a whole chapter on the wind tunnel testing in the book, and models and all that stuff. And then, of course, when they brought it out the track, it was insanely fast compared to other cars. And now the Ford people hate to hear this, because they say, well, if you look at the qualifying speeds, though, the qualifying speeds were, often very, very close. You understand that qualifying back then was just a few laps. And so you could, for instance, change the gearing in your car and over-rev your engine for a couple laps and not worry about blowing your car up. And back then, you were allowed to do all kinds of stuff, like, for instance, change your engine after you qualified. So I'm not going to get into that. All I can tell you is that after the 1970 season, these cars were, in effect, outlawed. And so they took the car to the Bonneville Salt Flats, and they set 28 land speed records that were all certified by various organizations like USAC. And here's the cool part, one of them was 216 miles per hour in a stock-bodied car running carburetors, or a carburetor. And so a carbureted engine in a stock-bodied car doing 216 miles per hour in 1971, that car right there. And that's the car I got to drive on the cover of Mopar Action magazine. So it's a great story. I love to think about it because it was so much fun. And it was at the very, very beginning of my writing career that I got to do that. And I imagined that someday I could be writing books and publishing them. And boy, that'd be a lot of fun. But at that point, I was still working on what was, in essence, my first book. And that was the book about Bobby Isaac. And so people ask about that book. That book is long gone, out of print. But the bulk of that material is in this book, Dodge Daytona and Plymouth Superbird, which unfortunately is out of print right now. But I'm working on that. I'm working on it. It's a back burner project, but I'll get there. But as of right now, just wanted to talk to you about the cover of Mopar Action magazine because I got there. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.